This episode, we are talking about I-9s, internal I-9 audits, paper versus electronic, the timing of it, just kind of a quick primer Q&A of best practices around I-9. So, Summer, I think you had a fun story that you wanted to tell about your past life working with I-9s before Jumpstart. Could you share with the audience what that story is?
Absolutely. Well, I don't know that I would call it a fun story, but I would definitely say that it was an experience that I learned quite a bit from, and it was very much a team bonding experience too. So, a little bit of background to this. A number of years ago, I actually worked with a restaurant chain that had over 45 employees spread out across the US in over 200 locations. And this company had all of their I-9s on paper. And of course, they were completed in the 200 or so locations by different managers. So when we conducted an internal audit, of course, with so many different people doing them in the restaurant industry, there's a lot of turnover. So, despite training, there's still mistakes that were being made. We realized that, we had to complete an internal audit, for 4,500 paper I-9s. And you can only imagine the amount of work that went into that. So we started this audit initially on our own, just to manage risk and make sure that we were not open to exposure by just ignoring it. And it took us quite a long time. Shout out to the team who worked on this. Rex, if you're listening, you were a total rock star. But the long and short of this story is that we ultimately were visited by ICE, who conducted an on-site audit. And in preparation for that, there was a ton of work that had to be done. And there was over $10 million in potential fines on the line. So, we had to get this right. And, to give credit to the team for how much work they did to this is like definitely not saying enough. But I'm happy to say that we did navigate that internal audit with zero fines. But at the end of it, we were voluntold that we needed to go on to EVerify so that there was higher visibility in regards to work authorization. So some of the biggest lessons that I learned from this is, number one, like, companies need to make internal audits for their I-9s part of their regular process. So, just doing them when an employee is hired or needs to be re-verified is just not enough. So that's number one. I recommend that companies, review all of their files. They, create a spreadsheet of all of the issues and then essentially create a checklist to go down and correct all of them. Number two is, when working with small businesses and doing the internal audits here at Jumpstart, one of the biggest issues that I see is actually, there's a few, but one is just not completing the I-9 in full within 72 hours. So it's really important that companies make that a priority. The second thing that I would mention is, this is where companies can get in trouble, is letting employees know, well, just bring us your passport or bring us your driver's license and your social security card. And you actually can't do that. It's really important that you show them the I-9 form list and just say, here's the list. These are the documents that we can accept. Please bring documents of your choice. So those are just kind of two nuggets that I wanted to drop. But if you're a larger company or you don't really have the bandwidth to make sure that these are done timely, consider using an electronic I-9 system. So that company that I mentioned that had thousands of them, we moved to a system called Tracker I-9 Complete. It was a total lifesaver, allowed us to monitor the status of completion, expirations, electronically. And, I think is definitely the direction that I see a lot of companies going. So I know I've said a lot in a short amount of time about I-9s, but Joey, you've been doing I-9s for a long time. I'm sure you've seen issues as well. So I'm curious to know, like, what issues do you see companies having, and what recommendations do you have in terms of some best practices?
Yeah, again, Summer, you laid out a masterclass, and we should start charging for this podcast. But no, in all seriousness, this is the type of stuff that we do in our consulting practice. So if you're interested in working with us to handle these tactical things and strategic, because it's a part of your strategic play, making sure that HR is not a financial risk to your organization. So definitely reach out to us at jumpstart-hr.com/contact. Um, my thing with I-9s, there's two, is not taking them as seriously as they should. So thinking that, oh, it's just a piece of paperwork. Who's ever going to know? Or what's the big deal? It's just a sheet of paper. We don't have to turn it into the government, you know. So people underestimate its importance. The second is just to your point that you mentioned earlier about telling people what documents to bring. You do have to give people the ability to select what documents they're going to bring. You cannot tell them. You might encourage and say, hey, as an example, these are some of the list A documents, list B documents, list C documents. But you cannot say, we only take, as an example, your driver's license and social security card. That's against the law. So those are the big things. I'll go a little bit further for organizations that maybe sponsor individuals like on visas, is knowing when to go back and recertify. So if there are documents that expire, whether a person's on a travel visa or a school visa, if they need to migrate from one visa class to another, just setting those dates and reminders of when to go in and update that information. That's what I got there. These are the tricky things that, uh, we typically in bigger firms, I know because that's kind of where I got my start, is we give the paperwork to like the entry level person. But the truth is, the accuracy of that data is so important that it will impact you on the corporate level, or the leadership level, if it's wrong. And so I love that you mentioned EVerify. I think that every firm should sign up for EVerify and be a part of it, just because it helps make the process a little easier, and you already know that you're in compliance, and you have that kind of proof that the documentation that you've been given is real. Summer, could you touch a little bit on EVerify, what it is, and for those who don't know, it's a free tool from the government, but could you share some experience with it?
Sure thing. So E-Verify, first I should mention, is only a requirement for companies that have government contracts that require E-Verify, and then there are some states that have decided that all companies are required to be on E-Verify. But for everybody else, it's voluntary. So for those of you that are in the voluntary category, as Joey mentioned, it's definitely something to consider. But I will also add to that if you're considering it, that you proceed with caution. So while it is a valuable tool, and that tool is intended to confirm that the documents that are being presented actually match the government records. So as Joey said, if you go through E-Verify and you get an employment authorized, then you know with great certainty that this individual is who they're saying they are and that they're eligible to work in the US. So without E-Verify, the individual completing the I-9 form is tasked with reviewing the documents, making their best assessment that they are legitimate, and then signing that attestation. So E-Verify essentially does that approval process for you. But the reason that I say proceed with caution is because while it's a very valuable tool, if you don't use it as intended, and what I mean by that is, remember those deadlines that I said regarding the 72 hours and having it all done timely? If you don't, you're now connected to government systems and they're being alerted anytime you're either not completing them timely or not closing the case, which is kind of the very last step in the E-Verify process. Is after you get an employment authorized, you actually have to close it out just to say like totally done. And if not, then this sends up red flags in their system. And now you're going to start getting nasty gram messages and anything in regards to the government contacting you about I-9s is never a good thing. So my word of advice here is E-Verify is great, but make sure that when you sign up, you are prepared to give it the time and attention that it needs.